Thank you for inviting me for a short video message to the conference. It is an honor for many reasons, if only because my father was one of the co-founders of FEE a long time ago, and he would be very proud of what has been accomplished in all its programs. And it's an honor really to say a few words about the role of higher education in what I would say troubled times. Let me start. There's not a lot of time, literally, and I would like to just give a few pointers, ideas, some from research that we've been engaged with, and some from in more intuitively, and some messages that are all too familiar to most of you, I must say, fortunately. First, the IPCC report does show in convincing and more clear ways, also by the use of these kinds of graphics, that we do live in a changing world with a rapidly changing climate that is sort of runaway climate change, you might call it, that one single species is causing. It's disrupting in a way a major ecosystems, whether it's the ocean currents, the climate, or the biodiversity, in severe ways. And these systems have been formed in natural ways over the last 4.4 billion years, and we're changing them in just a few hundred years. In part, that's the result of education. Education that was driven by innovation, by convenience, by helping the economy grow, expansionism, often through extractivism, exploitation, because an economic system that accompanied this innovation in higher education over the years was very much one not based on circularity, not based on equity, but on deep principles that are now considered highly problematic from a sustainability point of view. This figure also shows that young people today, born today, will be affected much more in the future than my life. I was born in the 60s, has been affected by climate change. And I grew up and lived most of my life in Northern Europe. There are also people of my generation who are already affected much more severely by climate change, living in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. So it's also very contextual how these impacts affect people in different ways. Young people today are getting worried about the future, do demand that education engages with these issues, these existential issues, and help them with the competencies, qualities that are needed to overcome these major challenges and to regenerate the earth and to create more sustainable futures for all, really, and also for other species. It's not an easy task. There's a lot of confusion, sometimes intentionally cultivated, as to what is healthy, what is a good citizen, what is democracy, what is sustainable, really. There are no simple answers, yet people tend to look for simple answers as we are overloaded with information. And we have artificial intelligence and all kinds of algorithms that kind of find the answers for us, but prevent us from deep thinking, finding the nuance, understanding the complexities, and looking at these issues from multiple vantage points, different perspectives. And clearly, education that does not engage in these issues in a meaningful, deep way risks the becoming a shallow form of teaching and learning, and could lead to people being easily manipulated, and being forced or nudged to live lifestyles that are not in harmony with the earth and are not and are often at the expense of other people. Climate, we know climate change is a big topic, but it is really the symptom of a deeper issue that has to do with the economy, the way we run the economy. It has to do with the kinds of values and ethics that we live by and are cultivated to live by. The kinds of habits and systems and structures that have been normalized but that work against sustainability. And without a climate literate or eco literate, probably better, population, it can easily become a victim to indoctrination, but also to manipulation. You could even say that good and profound education is the best form of mitigation. And often this is forgotten by policymakers. They tend to go for the adaptation, the changes in legislation and rules, etc. But they forget that we also need to think carefully about what kind of literacy, what kind of education do we provide for our young people today. So we do need to transition in education, not just in business, and that does require more to look more systemically at higher education. And just like the whole school approach, we might also consider a whole institution approach to climate action and sustainability. You recognize the flower with the five petals around, and at the heart, the vision, the ethos, the leadership that will be needed. And just walking you through, this is from the mission statement of the Norwegian Life Science University, saying that all students should develop competencies that can contribute to both inner well-being, sometimes referred to as the inner sustainability goals, and to the sustainable development of being. And that means being actively engaged in personal, local, and global sustainability issues from a wide range of perspectives. And these kinds of mission-driven education programs are becoming more and more common, and they're not just about innovation, expansion, and preparing young people for the world of work. Fortunately, that's shifting. And these kinds of competencies, they have been studied, described in different ways. Here are some that you probably have seen from a big group led by Brundiers and Armin Wieck, and others, many others. And things like systems thinking, anticipatory thinking or futures thinking, but also developing empathy and solidarity among people and between generations and between species. This is really critical if we want to create new generations of people and citizens who can live better than in some ways we have done. It also will mean going against the grain, resisting some of these normalized routines and patterns, which means basically critical thinking, asking difficult questions, questioning the normal, eliciting underlying principles, values, and mechanisms, but also peeking behind the curtains of the agro-business, sweatshops, fake news, and the way people are nudged to accept cookies and in a way having their minds mined by the data they provide to companies that can then milk those data, extract those data, and make money of it. So this requires also very much disrupting some of these systems and mechanisms. Also providing space for alternatives. So this kind of going against the grain, resistance pedagogy, it might be called, and disruptive capacity building are often ignored in our schools and universities, because we tend to depoliticize things, and if we really want to get at the heart of things, we sometimes need to politicize things by also questioning contradictions, hypocrisy, and the deeper values underneath that cultivate unsustainability in many instances. There are many examples nowadays of the blending of education and research and societal outreach, like urban living labs, where you connect different groups in society from the world of work, the world of governance, the world of the NGOs, civil society, the private sector, and indeed the world of education. Citizen science, different kinds, different forms, become very much a powerful tool to actively engage citizens and bringing them closer to science, helping them understand science better, but also empowering people when they can collect their own data and form a force when they map changes in the local environment, in biodiversity, in air quality, etc., which can force sometimes or persuade the government or companies to take action. It also means looking differently at research. Not so much, we have had a lot of research as evidence, empirical, analytical types, reductionist, but we have not seen enough research as co-learning, where we much more focus on how things are connected and related, and we work with people rather than learn from them or about them. It is much more relational in that you together create knowledge. And research as activism, maybe a step further, where we actually try to advance the case or a cause, I should say, of those who are marginalized, oppressed, or that could also be the non-human and the more than human world, where scientists use their capacity, their networks, their power in a way to serve a cause other than the economy. Because let's not forget, there is a hidden curriculum of unsustainability in many schools and universities that is also highly normative, because sometimes we are told we should not be normative in education, but there's always normativity involved. And what we are talking about here, I think, is developing education and research that is underpinned by a moral compass of solidarity and care rather than one of competition and individualism, and kind of survival of the fittest. Um, Fortunately, we see in many universities and colleges around the world that this research as co-learning and even research as activism is becoming more and more accepted and is legitimate, especially, and this is obviously required when these research strands or paradigms also are supported by rigorous research that may have different criteria, but it needs to be rigorous for it to be science, obviously, otherwise we can lose trust, and that's not what you want either. New kinds of methods are becoming more and more normal in universities, also engaging in social emotional learning, intuitive intelligence, spirituality, local and indigenous ways of knowing, showing some humility with regards to scientific ways of knowing, um, being open to blending different forms of teaching, learning, and knowing is critical, and the arts and the humanities play a key role in this. Let me end with a little example of a local, because I'm in Hasselt, Belgium at the moment for a greening school grounds conference. But this on the left is a school here in Hasselt, St. Paulus, that really made a multi-stakeholder project around greening the school grounds and making it a place where people can wander, play, plant, grow food, connect, have a social space to experiment, which can be connected to the curriculum, to the community, which invites different subject areas if you want to really understand soils, if you want to understand if microbes, how microbes are formed or supported or strengthened in the soil, but also looking at water, looking at energy, looking at mobility, how they get to school. All this becomes a living kind of lab for sustainability, and there's often the connection with higher education, and that is needed, and the local government to help make this work. And all these initiatives that are all around the world, also in universities, greening campuses obviously, but then connected to this whole university approach. So it's not just a one-off project, but it connects with the whole system, is happening in more and more places. And ideally, it joins a wider sustainability movement, as we can see all around the world at the moment. And obviously there are other movements too that go in a direction that we're not happy about, but I think the kind of learning that's underneath these kinds of movements is very deep and very solid and forms a current, whereas the kind of populist movements are not so supported by this deep kind of learning of different stakeholders together. Also in the world of governance, there are many people who try to support these kinds of movements, and eventually when both the political tide and these movements come together, I think a tipping point will be near and we can really transition towards a more sustainable world. So, in the end, climate action and sustainable living in general needs to be underpinned by an eco-literate society, critical thinking and an ethic of care. this will require a certain willingness and a capability and space to go against the normal, to be a bit disruptive and to be a bit transgressive, to break these stubborn, resilient systems that make unsustainability the default. Active engagement in climate action and sustainable living requires creativity, inspiring practices, which you hopefully will share at the meeting, active hope, and an attractive future and attractive futures. Often sustainability is surrounded by an air of doom and gloom and negativity, and we need to get out of that. It is exciting. It leads to more meaningful lives. It can lead to more aesthetically pleasing places to live. There are so many positive spin-offs of sustainability that we need to make visible to make it more attractive. So education and learning and capacity building are key levers for this, but not all education and learning and capacity building. We must remember and be cautious. Not all education leads to sustainability. It does require a reflection on what kind of education is needed to make the world more sustainable than the one currently in prospect. Thank you for listening. The 5 minutes went 15, which was not my intention. Hopefully it will still be of use, and hopefully we'll still have plenty of time to discuss with each other. Thank you again, and dare to transgress like Banksy does with a beautiful drawing here that makes you think what's going on here. And that's what we need to do. What's going on here, and how do we change the pathway from this linear one to a more organic flower, much like the flower you see behind me right now. Thank you very much, and have a very good conference.